Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Mordechai and Raya, for hosting this Kabbalah Café as we approach the end of Chumash Bereishit. Sorry that it's 2 minutes late. The cell phone that I was trying to use was not connecting, and Baruch Hashem, now I've succeeded to connect. Tomorrow, we are going to announce Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek. We're announcing that we're finishing the entire Chumash of Bereishit, and everyone together, obviously outside in the public area, and with masks, we'll all announce together that we are strengthening ourselves and mainly strengthening ourselves together. If you saw the weekly video that I sent out yesterday before Shabbat, you will see a very interesting subject on how it's possible to finish off the entire Chumash with something very negative of Yosef's passing. But we have a rule, on another note, we have a rule that anytime we finish a part of the Torah, it can be connected to the beginning of that same part. So, for example, if we finish the entire Talmud, part of the concluding the Talmud is connecting it once again to the beginning of the Talmud, just like we do on Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah, we have a big celebration, we finish the entire Chumash, and right away, in the next Torah, a couple of minutes later, we begin the beginning of Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim et haaretz. In the beginning, Hashem created the heavens and the earth. We restart the entire Torah. What's the message? The message is that when we finish a part of the Torah, it's not like finishing a book or a novel or a science book or whatever it is. You're finishing a part of the Torah, you're completing a part of the Torah. Every time we start, when we finish a part of Torah, we're not saying, oh, I'm finished, thank God, and now you put it away back on the shelf. Rather, we're here to restart again. We're here to connect again on a deeper level to the Torah this time. And that's something which is extremely, extremely precious, because the Torah is the most precious thing we have in the world. So the same thing when we finish tomorrow in Shul, and also when we'll finish in reading the Chitat. We talked a few days ago about learning the Chumash, the daily Chumash every day. And so today we read from Shishi to Shvi, and tomorrow we're going to learn at home from Shvi until the end. So as soon as we finish at the end, there must be a connection to the beginning. True that we don't start again next week from the beginning of Bereishit, but at least there must be a connection between the end of the Chumash and the beginning of the Chumash. Wow, what could be the beginning? What could be the connection between creation of the entire world, the heavens and the earth, and the fact that Yaakov and his family came down to Mitzrayim, came down to Egypt. Yaakov passes away, Yosef passes away, and then we finish the entire Chumash, and the beginning of next week discusses the whole subject of Parashat Shemot, and how the actual slavery of Am Yisrael began. So what could be the connection to the subject of creation of the heavens and the earth? One more interesting question before we share with you the explanation, is that you might be aware that the Alter Rebbe's grandson was the Tzemach Tzedek. The Alter Rebbe was the founder of Chabad, Rabbi Shneir Zalman, and his grandson Menachem Mendel became later the third Chabad Rebbe. Menachem Mendel's mother, who was the daughter of the Alter Rebbe, her name was Devorah Leah. And unfortunately, she passed away very young, and that is because she was very, very righteous, and she knew with her divine inspiration that the Alter Rebbe was going to pass away young because of his spreading of Chassidut, which actually led to the Yud Tet Kislev going to the jail and everything else. And so she asked Hashem to take her life early. It's a long, interesting story, very, very moving story of she took a Beit Din and opened her own Kodesh, and she gave several years of her life to her father. And she asked her father to raise her son. So there are many interesting stories about the Tzemach Tzedek growing up right near on the lap of his grandfather, the great Rabbi Shneir Zalman, the founder of Chabad. And so one day, Menachem Mendel, as a young boy, comes home and says, Zaidi, I don't understand. I read the Parsha of Vayechi. In the beginning of the Parsha, it says that Yaakov lived 17 years in Mitzrayim, the last 17 years of his life, from the age of 130 to the age of 147. 17, it says in the Baal HaTurim, means good, is the same numerical value as good. And what do the commentaries explain? That the best years of Yaakov were when he was in Mitzrayim. In Mitzrayim? How is that possible? Out of all places in the world, where were his best years? In Mitzrayim. It doesn't seem to make much sense. Mitzrayim was the most immoral place in the world. Yaakov Avinu was such a tzaddik. So many years of his life, even though he had a difficult life, so many years were spent in the yeshiva of Shem and Ever, learning Torah. So how is it possible that the best years of his life were spent? So Menachem Mendel, the little child, asked his grandfather, how is it possible that the best years of Yaakov's life were in Mitzrayim, the most immoral place in the world? And so the answer that we're going to explain for the first question that we asked will hopefully answer this too. The first question that we asked was, what could be the connection between the end of the Chumash Bereishit to the beginning of Chumash Bereishit? So let's rewind all the way back to the beginning of the Chumash Bereishit. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashmayim et haaretz. Rashi, which is the classical commentary on the Torah, even before explaining what Bereishit is about, and the Shamayim, the Aretz, the heavens and the earth, and the creation of the world, he has sort of an introduction to the Torah. It starts with Bereshit, but Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak said, really, the Torah should have begun with the mitzvahs. How come the Torah begins with history? Torah is not a history book. What is the purpose of the Torah recording the entire Chumash Bereishit and the first 2.5 parshas of the next Chumash that we're going to start next week? What's the point? If you want to have a history book, let's have a separate book, and that will discuss the history of the creation of the world, our patriarchs, our matriarchs, the Shvatim, the going down to Mitzrayim, and for that matter, other stories as well later on. What's the point? So he says as follows. Because if the nations of the world will come along and they will say that you are thieves because you took Israel from us, so that Hashem wants the whole world to know, and perhaps 2 or 3 billion of today's mankind believe in God and believe in the Bible. And so if the Bible itself records that Hashem is the one who created the world, and he, that same creator of the world, gave Israel, the land of Israel, before it was land of Canaan, the nations of the world were there. And then came along Am Yisrael, the Jewish nation was formed, and then Am Yisrael, the same creator, Hashem, took Israel from the nations of the world and put his chosen nation into Israel. That now everyone knows that really we're not thieves. So the Rebbe asks a simple question over here. The nations of the world aren't stupid. Why would they think that we're thieves? For heaven's sakes. They know either for the fact that they know that when you have all along history, you have one big military or kingdom which conquers another country. And it's a very normal thing. Today, Baruch Hashem, we don't have that. Because today we realize that we need to get along more. But in days of old, what made one kingdom be extra strong and greater than another kingdom? Whoever captured more land, whoever conquered, whoever threw out other people from their country and put their people in that country, whoever conquered more land, they were the ones that were greater. So why should they think that we're thieves? Why should we be any different than any other country kingdom which conquers land? We also conquered land. And so the Rebbe explains a very interesting idea. It's more of a spiritual concept. You see, the nations of the world know that we are the chosen nation. And believe it or not, but they respect us for it. Because the Torah itself indicates that we are the chosen nation. Hashem chose us. Right before the Torah was given, in about 5 or 6 weeks, we're going to learn about it. We're going to read about it. And so, if we say, if Hashem declared that we are the chosen nation, so then the nations of the world respect us for it. So in their mind, what is a chosen nation? Chosen nation? You should be learning the Torah all day. You should be doing mitzvahs all day. You should be involved in your spirituality all day. And who should be involved in plowing the land, doing business, supporting the chosen nation in a perfect world, in their mind? The nations of the world. As it's going to be when Mashiach comes, that then it will be revealed the greatness of Am Yisrael, and then the nations of the world are going to respect more Am Yisrael. So in their minds, we should be secluded from Am Yisrael should be secluded from working the land, and they should be like in the desert. They should be focused on spirituality, where they don't have to take care of anything materialistic. You know, like it says in the that we were in the midbar, that our clothes were cleaned while they were on us. We didn't have to send it to the laundromat or to the cleaners. And also the clothes grew with us. As we grew, everything was miraculous. We didn't have to take care of anything. Like the big the successful businessman that has everything done for themselves. They just have to sit in the office and everything gets taken care of. That's how seemingly Am Yisrael should be. No? Doesn't that make sense? We're the chosen nation, and this is how the Gentiles are making the calculation. In their mind, this is how it should be. Comes along Rashi, and Rashi explains all the way in the beginning that no, that's a mistake. That's not how we're supposed to understand. That's not how we're supposed to view the Jewish people's relationship with the world. When Hashem chose us as being the chosen nation, He did not intend that we should be totally secluded from the world. Hashem wants us to inherit the land. The land meaning Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. And also, spiritually, that we should be connected to the land, the world. Not to be, quote unquote, secluded from the world. That's not the purpose. The purpose is not that Am Yisrael should be here and should be up and away and not be involved with the world. Like we learned a few days ago about the great Parush, that he was a great guy, but for 50 years he learned only Torah. But the purpose is not only to learn Torah. Everyone in their own realm, we have an obligation to be involved with the world. So in the beginning of the Chumash, how does Rashi explain that? He says, how do we teach the world that Eretz Yisrael is ours? The world is ours. We're not here only to be involved in spirituality, but we have to get involved in the world. We have to bring the Kedusha, bring the spirituality and connect it to the world, elevate the materialism of the world. That's why Hashem starts the Torah from Bereishit bara Elokim et hashamayim et haaretz. Listen, the Torah doesn't begin from HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, from the first mitzvah. That's also part of the Torah, of course. But a major part of the Torah and the beginning of the Torah is to set the tone straight. That our obligation is to be here in the world, learn Torah, teach others, and bring spirituality right into this materialistic world. So that's regarding the beginning of the Chumash Bereishit. Now let's fast forward, zoom towards the end of Chumash Bereishit. Now we're in Parashat Vayechi. Vayechi, we're talking about how Yaakov comes down to Mitzrayim. How is that different than Yaakov's almost entire life? He was in Eretz Yisrael. He was in with Yitzchak, obviously for most of his life. And Eretz Yisrael, it's a holy place. And the other Shvatim, the other tribes, they were shepherds. And when you're a shepherd, you can walk around in the open field and sing, play the flute, pray to Hashem, daven. In other words, being secluded from the world. Unlike Yosef. Yosef was an individual who was able to be in Mitzrayim, the most immoral part of the world, for many years. And he made it to the top. He became the prime minister, the viceroy of Mitzrayim. Yaakov was very concerned. Oy vey, I'm going to come to Mitzrayim. What's Mitzrayim going to look like? I'm sorry, what are my grandsons going to look like? Being raised in Mitzrayim, when he came and he saw, and in this week's parsha, right after Sheni, he says, wow, these are my grandchildren. He was so inspired that he went to bless them. Because he saw that it's possible to be in Mitzrayim and to lead Mitzrayim and not to be affected from the immorality of the Egyptians. And that's what Parashat Vayechi is all about. That's why Vayechi, this parsha, where Yaakov was in Mitzrayim for how many years? For 17 years. 17 is a numerical value of Tov. These were his best years. It's okay to be spiritual in Israel, in Eretz Canaan, before Yaakov comes down to Mitzrayim. But to be able to experience spirituality in Mitzrayim, that's a great chidush. That's a great innovation. That cannot be taken for granted. That's something which is very, very unique. It's like a teacher in the classroom where you have a child, which is a student, which always gets 95s and 100s in his test. And you have another student which gets, unfortunately, 35s and is always wild in the class, and it's hard to tame him. But one time, this child that usually gets a 35 all of a sudden gets a 95. And the teacher makes a big deal out of it. Why? What's the big deal? When the other student that usually gets a 95, he got a 95 now too. Why didn't you make a big deal out of it? Because that's not a chiddush. It's wonderful. He gets a pat in the back and everything else. But there's no point to make a big deal out of it. Because he always gets 95s. But when this student that usually gets a 35, now he got a 95, wow, let's make a big deal out of it. Let's encourage him. Hopefully he'll keep up the good work. And that's the idea over here. Mitzrayim, which Mitzrayim is usually considered an immoral place, over there to build Goshen, to build yeshivas, to build Torah learning, especially with the tribe of Levi. That's the most wonderful thing in the world. And that's why the best years of Yaakov Avinu, the Alter Rebbe explained to his grandson Menachem Mendel, who later became the Tzemach Tzedek, He said that's why the 17 best years of Yaakov's life were in Mitzrayim. And that's the connection from the beginning of the Chumash to the end of the Chumash. At the end of the Chumash, we read now about how Yaakov brought his family into Mitzrayim, and we're going to leap tomorrow afternoon and then next week into the Chumash, the Chitat, the daily Chumash of Shemot, learning how Am Yisrael was in Mitzrayim and they started the slavery, unfortunately. What kept them going? What kept them as a nation? What kept them as a nation was the fact that Yaakov built a Torah infrastructure in Mitzrayim. And the tribe of Levi kept on learning Torah the entire time. And that is the message. That it's important to be able, that even when we are learning Torah, that we also have an effect on the lowest parts of the world. Just like in the beginning of the Chumash, just like in the beginning of Bereishit, we talked about how Am Yisrael needs to acquire Eretz Yisrael, not just to learn Torah the entire time, but to work the land and to elevate the world, elevate Hashem's beautiful world. So too, in Mitzrayim, no matter what purpose, no matter what we're doing there, either for the first approximately 100 years that we were there without having the slavery, or the time of the slavery, whenever we're there, whatever we're doing in any situation, we have to be focused on elevating that part of the world and the materialism of the world in any situation in which we find ourselves. So in summary, what we've learned today is that we are here to balance two things. Hashem made us a chosen nation to balance two very important things. On one hand, learning Torah. On the other hand, bringing the Torah and sharing the spirituality that we have with the world, whether it means to acquire Eretz Yisrael, acquire Israel, and work the land physically, or do business wherever we find ourselves in the world, or if we're in Mitzrayim, we're in Egypt, wherever we are, we have to learn the Torah and to use it, to use the spirituality of the world to elevate the world. Unlike the Gentiles can think that we are thieves, that we're taking a job which is not ours, it is ours. We're not here just to elevate ourselves in spirituality, but we're here to involve the world together with us. So this is a true message of chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. When we hear this, and we realize, and now we're concluding such a special chumash, the chumash of Bereishit, Genesis, we all announce together, let's be strong, and let's be strong and strengthen each other. Because this gives us the real strength that in the final moments of Galut, right before Mashiach comes, we know what our job is. We know what our mission is in this world. To balance learning Torah, building Torah infrastructures, even in Mitzrayim, wherever we are, and also elevating the world around us. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you'll be able to come to Shul tonight and tomorrow and have a special minyan. Sunday morning, right here, 9:30 with Rabbi Diamond. And then Monday morning, 9:30, we're going to learn the next verses of Tehillim, chapter 119, Psalm chapter 119. And Baruch Hashem, we had an awesome beginning, and I look forward to learning together with you next week as well. All the best. Shabbat Shalom.